Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chatted to a really nice guy, Bob Grant, a clinically trained relationship expert and the founder of Relationship Headquarters. For over 20 years, Bob from Atlanta, Georgia, has been helping successful women to find lasting relationships with men through his very successful programs. Bob chats about the unique challenges that these successful women have and how his programs help them to overcome these challenges and fulfill their dreams. Men and women are very different, and a woman's success can cause a particular set of circumstances because of the roles we are normally programmed to have. Bob chats about this, about how you treat your own heart, and so much more. Let's hear from Bob. Bob Grant, a huge welcome to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Greg. It's nice to be here.
And you're coming all the way from Atlanta, Georgia.
I am. It was a long trip, but it was worth it.
Well, thank you for going to that effort, and I hope the journey was a pleasant one.
Yes, Ireland is a lovely place.
Good man yourself. I've been looking forward to this podcast ever since you reached out to me with that email and gave me a quick overview of who you are and what you do. You didn't have to ask me too many times about the podcast. I thought, this is a really, really interesting man and what he does. I thought to myself, what a great way to meet women by setting up a program like this. And not only any women, successful women. What a great idea. But I presume that wasn't your motivation. So for the listener, you're a relationship expert, clinically trained. You've been in this industry of coaching people for over 25 years. If anyone wants to find you, your place is therelationshipheadquarters.com. And within that, you've got a lot of programs. And maybe to even use the words relationship is a little bit broad because you have a very specific niche, a very, very particular target audience, which I think is successful women.
It is successful women, and we're still working on maybe to say that a little differently, because a big part of successful for me is a woman that's wants to grow and wants to have a relationship, long term that lasts. I think probably most women do, but sometimes, and I've been like this too, if someone focuses on what can I do to make something happen quickly, like getting rich quick, or what can I do to make someone change quickly. And what I'm more interested in is how about if we just focus on the change or what we want. So when someone told me, I use the example of money of, let's don't get rich quick, let's just get rich. And I find people that do well with money have that mentality versus a gambling style. And if the goal then is I really want a relationship, where we have a connection, where we have respect with each other, where I can count on them when I'm sick or if I have a bad day and vice versa, then that's usually a different mindset. So even if someone makes a ton of money or they don't, that doesn't seem to be a big impediment to them, more the attitude. And to some degree, one reason I like this show is when I was looking through it, is you seem to have a certain curiosity. And when I find that in them, that they have some curiosity, they don't have all the answers, that I have a lot of good traits, but maybe there's something I could learn new, that to me is one of the best measures of success. And that's really what I'm interested in with someone is how can I help, versus just totally change you.
There's so much I want to talk to you about this because even when we talk about successful women, like one of the topics that I wrestle with a lot of the time is what is success to begin with? So we can get into that. And I think a lot of what you do is helping them to find a stable partner for marriage or life and companionship and everything else. Before we go there all in, what I'd like to do is for the listeners to get to know you a little bit. And how in the name of God did this guy in Atlanta, Georgia, stumble upon this particular niche and dedicate his life to it? So what I'm going to do is a colossal rewind and ask you, who the hell are you and where did you come from?
So I started off as a therapist because I took a course in college. And it was one of those professors that I think we probably all had, that I went to the class and I was fascinated. It didn't seem like I was in school. And I just loved going to class. One of the few classes in college I really enjoyed going to, but his I did. And then after that, I went to graduate school. And the idea that I could get paid money for doing this just seemed like it was a joke, but it was real. And then as I went out on my own, and that's all I was going to do, I had clients that would say, you should write a book. You should write a book. I don't want to write a book. You should write a book. Then went through that process of writing it. And then somebody showed me how to sell it online. And I started getting women, especially that most of them, they got plenty of dates. They had no trouble getting attention. I mean, I was 25 or 26 and single and kind of with that mindset. They would come to my office, and I wouldn't say this, but in my mind, I'm thinking, what's the problem? I'm like, just smile. Because I was thinking like a guy, like just smile and be nice, you'll be fine.
This is what you need to do.
It was so simple. The problem, but then as I listened to them, they just couldn't find someone, or they picked the wrong guys, and they were intelligent. It wasn't a dumb thing. They weren't like making obvious dumb mistakes. But there was like this internal block. And then when I worked at the hospital, I would see this when I would run groups. And there's men and women, but there were some women that they would always date an alcoholic, or some would always go out with a guy that was controlling. And a lot of these women were smart. I mean, they could tell you, I know I'm doing this, but I can't stop. And then I started to learn all that stuff I learned in graduate school really was true, that there really was stuff going on below the surface that people weren't aware of. Because the women would come in and say, that's it, I broke up with him. I'm not going to date anyone like that again. 6 weeks later, met someone new. 3 weeks after that, oh my gosh, he drinks, or whatever the thing was. And I started to see all that unconscious stuff was, unless someone's aware of it, that pattern is just going to keep repeating. It doesn't matter how smart or how strong they are. I mean, alcoholics go through this too. As I started working with them, what I really liked was when they would come back and after years of trying stuff, oh my gosh, this actually works. Or they met someone and it felt awkward at first, but they stuck with it. Some things I tell people, I didn't choose this particular niche. They chose me. And I've just liked it since then. And not that men are hard to work with. At the time on the internet, most of the men's stuff was how to pick up girls, how to get girls in bed, how to get lots of girls in bed, that stuff. And I'm thinking, I didn't go to grad school for this. I'm thinking, I don't want to do this. I mean, there were guys that did that, but they just bored me. So the women in general were more interested in it. Not that men aren't interested in growth, but at least at the time, that was the main choice. And I just enjoy working with them. And I find each one a challenge, like a puzzle to solve. And I love solving puzzles. I love being curious. I love the idea that not everyone fits into a cookie cutter box. But I find that desire is there. I mean, I talk to women probably in 60 countries, and the cultures are different. But the core thing is there of, I don't want to do life alone. I'd like to have someone's partner. I don't want to be dominant. I don't want to be a servant. And, every year, I still enjoy it. And I figure I'll just keep doing this until I die or until I stop enjoying it. And I have a feeling when I die, it's probably going to come first.
I want to get into that an awful lot deeper, but I'd like to get to know you a little bit as well. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a town called Gainesville, Georgia, which is just outside of Atlanta, Georgia.
And was that a rural community or a city location?
It's a smaller, it was probably 20,000, but it was the type place that, whenever you went out, there was usually someone you would meet, you would know. Not everyone, but that was the rule of thumb. When I went out, I would bump into someone and said, hey, Bobby. Yeah. I was called Bobby back then.
That sounds like a nice kind of a place to grow up.
I mean, I enjoyed it. It was big enough that there was stuff to do, and we were an hour away from Atlanta by car. I mean, to raise a family and be a kid, I had lots of activities. So, I mean, I feel like I was blessed to be where I was.
And your mom and dad, what did they do?
So my mom was a nurse, and my dad was a doctor, and they met in the hospital, of course.
So caring and listening and dealing with people was sort of in the household, was it?
It was. I remember with Dad growing up as a child, he had to do what's called being on call. And back then, you would rotate with people who was going to be on emergency room call. And that meant like getting up at 4 a.m. at times, if there was some specialty. As a kid, I remember thinking, I don't want to be a doctor. I don't want to do that. I mean, just for that reason, I thought it would drive me crazy. And then there was calculus and those other things. And I just couldn't do calculus. But I did I liked from him, especially both of them, they never said this, but there's a couple of things. One, most every problem has a solution. It may not be obvious and you may not like the answer, but there is usually a solution. And the other thing they taught me that I am eternally grateful for is they didn't let me quit. So if I was on a team I didn't like or had something, no, you're going to finish this. You don't have to do it again, but you're going to finish. And that served me well when I've taken risk and things haven't gone well. I tell people I just don't know how to quit. Sometimes I probably should have, but that's a wonderful thing, I think, when you have that mentality that quitting is not an option, about how resourceful that makes you. It doesn't mean you're tough. It's just, I don't have any other option but just to figure out some solution or get help.
I think something has crept into our society. I would say with a lot of our younger folk, quitting is a quick go-to place. We talk about our mental health and all that kind of stuff. There's a bit of a pattern here with some of the conversations I've been having since the beginning of the year. And what I'm afraid of is we're talking too much about well-being and mental health and all that kind of thing. And every stressful situation suddenly is, oh my God, this is damaging to my mental health. And I'm finding a lot of the time, no, that's normal life. There's a bit of pressure, there's a big exam, there's a work situation, there's a demanding client, it's a stressful week, or it's a particular time of the year when, it's full on year end, people are trying to hit targets and all that kind of stuff. And instead of it being an alarm bell the whole time about, oh, this is a danger to my mental health, no, it's part of living. And as you say, you need to figure it out and punch through it. And that simple lesson about don't give up on the team. It's an important match. There's people depending on you. It's a huge life lesson.
And I think with that, for me, and I think others are better when I'm a part of something bigger. And I think it also helps us not take ourselves too seriously. I used to do a lot of work with people with depression and anxiety. And it wasn't about telling them to pick yourself up by the bootstraps as much as, when someone's desperate, they're willing to try almost anything. And I would see some of them were just like, oh, I can't do this or I can't do that. I'm like, okay. And it reminded me of my grandmother growing up. And she got depressed, when I was probably 7 or 8. She broke her hip, whatever the reason was. And she stayed in bed for 40 years because she had the mentality, I don't feel like it, wouldn't do what the doctor said, wouldn't get out and meet people in spite of how she felt. So I saw what happened when you just give in to whatever you feel. I mean, I'm all for being in touch with feelings, but being at the mercy of feelings is awful. And I think that's what I heard, some of what you're alluding to with the mental health. And I think it robs people like a muscle. Not everything is about just work hard, but what we feel to me is not who we are. It's just what I'm feeling. So some days I don't feel as good as others. Okay, but I don't change. My nose doesn't get bigger. My eyes get bigger because I feel certain things. And with my closest friends, I expect them to be my closest friends on good days and bad. Now, maybe I have to listen more some days. Maybe you need something. But the idea that who I change or that I'm fragile, and I see some of the women I talk with, is I've had these bad things happen. And I'm like, it is bad, but your past doesn't have to equal your future. Now, you can keep perpetuating it. And a scar is a scar, absolutely. But I agree with you that, and I've had this with my sons too, I understand things are tough, but this is part of growing up. And just to normalize that with them, it's painful, but you'll do fine.
Yeah, and it can be, well, that's terrible, don't go to school today, or no, you're going there again. Yes. And I know the teacher doesn't like you, or there's a bully in the class, but I'm not going to let them have that power over you. And they have the power over you if you give into it. I think I love that word you use, or that phrase about being at the mercy of your feelings. be aware of them, absolutely. Understand 100% why this particular situation makes me feel uncomfortable. But be aware as well that you can nudge on. So that was, so I imagine being in the company of your mum and your dad, and that bit of advice that your dad was giving was really, really good. The conversations around the kitchen table when you were growing up, did they happen? Obviously with mum and dad, and lots of, if they're working in that hospital type environment, I can imagine that would, lots of unsociable hours. Did you get to have dinner together at any point?
Yeah, that's a good point, because it's funny how with your parents, I've had some friends whose dad was an airline pilot. So a lot of their conversations were around landing gears and foggy runways and stuff. We would never have a conversation. So I would hear stories from Dad occasionally about patients and some of the things they did. He would never tell names. And he worked at the emergency room, and like I could never get a street motorcycle. He would just never. Why not? He said, because I've been in the emergency room and seen. Well, that's right or wrong, but that was his thing. But we would hear things, and he had a way with it. What I learned from here was that after all the stuff he would see, he would say, a lot of stuff with folks is in their head. He wouldn't tell everybody that. And it's not that there wasn't illness, but someone would have a pain and they were like, what's wrong? He would go, I don't know. He did it long enough. He says, or they would stick out their arm. People in public would, some of the people say, Doc, my arm's sore. Can you tell what's wrong? And he learned he had to kind of act like he was serious. He'd kind of feel the arm a little bit and go, yeah, probably rest it. Just a general thing. So we would hear conversations like that about what had happened and some of the politics of the hospital. But we had a lot of medical stuff around most conversations, especially with Mom being a nurse. They could just pick up with each other right off the bat.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting. And as a young lad in school, when the teacher has totally and utterly lost your attention, where does Bob go in his head? What adventures do you go on?
That was often. So I've got a learning disability, and we didn't know what it was at the time. It's just that Bob would get notes that would say, or Bobby when I was a kid, it was, try harder, Bobby, concentrate more. And I'm thinking, I cannot study any harder. But then, growing up, that's not an acceptable reason just to complain. And it wasn't until my junior year in high school, my mom said, Bobby, she said, we don't have to do this. You're about to graduate, but I've always known something was off. And my first thought was, I said, is something wrong with me? I don't know what I said. I was like, am I defective or something? She said, no. She said, but I've noticed how hard you studied. So we went through, and there's a wonderful psychologist, and we did the testing, and everything was going great until we got to one section. She said, read this out loud. I read out loud, and she said, I put it down. What did I say? And I couldn't remember. And I felt so embarrassed. And she said, that's it. Try it again. I did it again. And there's this one thing, auditory processing, that I just didn't do good when listening or remembering people were talking. That's all you do in school, is listen while teachers talks. And once I knew that, the nice thing is once I kind of knew the problem, then we have an idea of what to do with it. So from my own experience, that's why I like doing with clients or people is, I don't really care what's wrong. Let's just find out so we know what to do. What are our options? So what's wrong doesn't scare me. Not knowing scares me, because then we're just randomly fixing stuff or doing impulsive stuff or addictive stuff to try to make it work. So that brings back memories when you say that about school, because school was a lot of, when will I get out of here? So I would go everywhere in my imagination.
Yeah. What were your dreams? What did you, when you imagined a career ahead of you and everything, what did you think of doing?
When I was younger, I always wanted to write. I love creative writing, but I was awful at English, grammar and stuff. And so, I just never took that seriously. But that was in the back of it. I wanted to be, when I was really younger, sports star, professional athlete. But about sixth grade, I started realizing, okay, I'm not as good as this guy, so there's no way I'm going to make it nationally. And it wasn't until after I graduated, got out, that I realized, I could just dictate books, then have someone help me with editing. I didn't have to be great at grammar. So it's that dream I had when I was younger. I don't know if you remember Peter Frampton.
Yeah, absolutely.
I saw an interview with him.
The Frampton Live, was it? That was his big album.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm a rocker. You're okay.
Well, he had this sound in his head, and he didn't know how to do it until he heard someone play with their instrument, whatever that device is with the guitar you use. And he heard someone do it, and he goes, that's it. And because he had it, and then of course he made the album, became super famous, and did other things. But I think that's when you talk about dreams when you're younger. I think the core ones, at least for me, were meant to be fulfilled. But a lot of times we don't know the path on how to do it. But if it's something that really resonates, like with him, it's like, yeah, give it enough time, there will be a way or a solution or a path or something that kind of pops up, if it's something you really want to do deeply. So I like it when people pay attention to those dreams. But that was to be a writer or creative. I just love the idea of taking thoughts and writing out a story.
And the idea that you could have a career in therapy and relationship coaching, when did that filter into your brain as an option?
Yeah, I've always liked being helpful. I've always been a pretty good listener. And I was originally going to do, they have something called Young Life over here. And it's a Christian-based, like, things for kids. And it's like a club or something you go to. And I was going to do something like that. I thought helping teenagers would be fun. And then I got to school, college. And then when I took that class, that counseling class, I was like, this is where I belong. It's not an intellectual thing. It's to me, it's similar to the first time I finally saw a piece of art years ago. I've never been into art, but I saw it and I thought, this is why people like art. I just couldn't stop staring at it. And this was like that. I would go to class thinking, this isn't even work. This is so interesting and so fun. And it just spoke to me. And I've still enjoyed it ever since then.
The first podcast of 2025 was with my cousin, Mick Brennan, who's a counsellor and a psychotherapist. His father, my uncle, passed away a number of years back. And he actually said to me he found it very, very difficult to, I suppose, take on board everything that his clients were telling him and to deal with his own grief at the same time. Now, and he just said he pulled back the workload, he pulled back the amount of people that he was seeing and everything else. With you and getting into that discipline, were you part of a practice that was set up already, and or did you set out on your own? I'm not even sure how it works over there.
Well, it probably works a lot of different ways for the person. Really, when you graduate, probably like a lot of college graduates, but out of grad school, you get this great education, but then no one tells you how to make a living at it. So you either find some place to work. So I worked at a hospital to get some experience, and I enjoyed that. And then when it was time to go out on my own, it was really 5 hours at this shelter I was working at, and then I ended up driving an hour away on the next day for 5 hours another place. I didn't, I just making enough just to survive the first couple of years. And then, like anything else, you get to know some people, and they make a recommendation to then work at a place that has more hours. I joined a big practice and worked there for a while, and kind of developed a client base. Then went out on my own again. It's just sort of a stacking thing. But early on, it was, how can I make enough money just to live and get by while I'm learning?
And within that discipline, I'm sure there's an A to Z of being in very heavy duty places with people with huge trauma that you're counseling. And then maybe very, very light stuff where it's not at all as serious as that. And finding your own niche within that. And I know you were saying suddenly you felt you were dealing with a lot of the same types of problems coming in and say, I'm good at this. That was pretty much it for you, because you have 25 years behind you. And, maybe the first 5 years were you doing a little bit of everything. And then finding this particular niche. Was it as simple as that before you knew it, it was all this particular type of client that was coming through your door?
It's funny here, as you say that, looking back, it seems that way. I'm sure you can relate with all that you've built, is that in the process of it, it's like, this doesn't seem simple. This is like, how am I going to get to here or there? But what I really liked with the hospital is when we worked there was no place to send people. So when they came there, we had to be the solution or something. And that really taught from a mindset standpoint of, maybe we don't fix everything, but, what can we do to help them? And we do it as a team. And I've always loved that approach since then, as opposed to just, well, this is too hard, or just, farm them off to someone else, to really dive in there with the person, and not to to like totally identify with their pain, but just as soon as that's uncomfortable to sit when they're talking about someone's died or something awful has happened, to be present with them in the room or over the phone or even a Zoom call while they're doing it. And there's a term for that's called containment. And the easy thing is just to kind of make a joke or make light of it. But to have a containment is to tolerate that uncomfortable feeling, going back to what we said. And I've learned that when you do that, a lot of times you'll get insights. A lot of times you can empathize with them. A lot of times when you say stuff, the person can actually feel that you're sitting there with them and present with them. And so I learned a lot of that early on. And I didn't realize that's what I was learning. But looking back, I mean, that stayed with me and I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was kind of all over the place at times, but that process seems to kind of refine, I think, just the willingness to go through that. So you're right. First few years were like that, and then it got more settled, probably as I got more settled.
Yeah. And in a funny way, when I give you that example and I talk about an A to Z of something that's, serious trauma, something deep that happened in your childhood, sexual abuse or whatever, very, very heavy duty where people may be close to taking their own lives, that kind of deep side of it. And when I think about what you do now, in a way I can be a bit frivolous with it and think, oh, for God's sake, successful women want to find, a perfect man, whatever. I could be very throwaway with it. But when you actually do think about it, I can imagine there could be a lot of pain there and a lot of loneliness with people achieving huge success on one aspect of their lives and being desperately lonely and empty on the other. And maybe one nearly feeds the other in one place, that the more successful you are, maybe that's the contra to that emptiness everywhere else. So you put all of your energy, all of your creativity, all of your focus into this one place where you know and you understand. Is there a lot of pain involved?
Yeah, that's a good observation, because as you're talking about the more success a woman or man has in one area, there's the expectation that it should sort of obviously occur in other areas as well. Is growing up, my dad would tell me about, I'm generalizing, but a lot of the doctors, they're very good at being doctors, but they were awful with their investments because they assume because I'm smart in this area, I should have the same success. And that would cause a lot of fear and a lot of shame and embarrassment. And I think for the women I talk with is they do try hard. It's not for lack of effort, and it's embarrassing. And they don't want to go broadcast. One woman, I was in a mastermind group, like 6 or 8 of us, and we were doing like hot seat. And she says, yeah, I used to be your ideal client. She goes, and it's embarrassing. And she said, because to admit, I don't know what I'm doing, or not to go to something's wrong with me, because I do really good in my business. And she was nice and bubbly. And so she made some suggestions about how it's approached, but the pain and the embarrassment for her, it runs pretty deep. I mean, just that was a reminder of the way she said it. And because they try hard, that's what tends to make that spiral deeper, is it feels like I fail every time I try, it doesn't work out. And then I give more, I have super boundaries that just try all these extreme stuff, and it just, can someone fix this puzzle for me? Yeah. It's probably the way most of them would say it.
Okay. It's funny. I'm obviously a male trying to join this conversation and trying to understand it as best I can. For a few years within our business, we used to take this very high-end fashion show on tour around Ireland. And the simple idea was we used to bring the best models in the country, the best staging, the best lighting. We take the models to the best venues. We get the top fashion brands. We build a whole event around this. So typically in a 2 or 3 week period, we go to maybe 10 or 12 venues, night after night after night, bringing the best of everything. The women would arrive, there'd be an exhibition area, all the lovely things that women like, from makeup to jewellery and all that kind of thing on the exhibition. Then they go for a lovely meal, then the fashion show, and then there's entertainment after. So we spent a lot of time with the most beautiful models in Ireland. And something really, really surprised me, in that there were more than one night when we all had a long night and you're trying to let the hair down, and we all end up in some nightclub somewhere and we're dancing away. And I was shocked and horrified at how the most beautiful women that you've ever been with, there's nobody dancing with them. And what I kind of realized and what I observed is most normal guys will look at them and they will think, I haven't a chance with her. And then you get the gobshite who can't see beyond it. You know, Farmer Joe or some guy who just doesn't see past that. And these women are so delighted to dance with the gobshite, it doesn't matter. And he could be a fairly ignorant guy who doesn't have too many niceties or wouldn't be very finessed and might end up treating her badly and getting drunk and all that kind of thing. But they're delighted to have someone. And as sure as night follows day, those relationships collapse and then they fall into another one and another one. So in that particular day, and I suppose we see it more in the celebrity world where those types of people end up attracting particular types because normal, caring men, in this case, wouldn't go anywhere near them because they think, I haven't a chance with that gorgeous looking woman. I'm thinking now to the successful women in business. And you see that success in their CEO and they're running hotshot businesses and everything. I wonder in exactly the same way do a lot of men think, ooh, I wouldn't have a chance with her because of the same thing, same kind of dynamic going on in your head. And the few idiots who don't even contemplate that. So while you might think, my God, they can attract any fish in the sea because they're so successful, it probably isn't the case. Their selection of men, and this is just a theory, might be tiny because it's the few that think, yeah, I've no bother going out with her and I don't care that she's really successful. So it ends up being a very narrow cohort. And you might end up finding a lot of assholes in that cohort, possibly, and then they get burnt from it. Just a little theory about maybe whether you're extremely beautiful or very successful in business. You could be both, of course. And how do you attract the normal men?
No, I like, because what you're saying, you're talking about I think I'm hearing you say it is like the extremes, and the either very successful, very attractive, and outside the norm. And just from a number standpoint, that does limit us. Now, there's still a lot of people within those.
Of course.
And what I find is in talking with the women, again, this is broad, but the idea is that women in general want someone to look up to, not a daddy, not that, but just a certain respect, a man that they respect. And how they measure that, I find sometimes gets them in trouble. So if it's going to be a measure of success, I want someone more successful than me, or, okay, I'm not saying you can't have that. But if I start talking with them, what I want to find out is how important is that to you really? Is that really a big thing? I had one woman when I was interviewing her about if I could help her. And I said, I've got this program. I'll work with you for a year. I said, we'll either find him or you'll be right there. She says, great. She goes, I want to marry a billionaire. And I paused and said, a billionaire. I said, okay, why not someone worth 100 million? Oh no, he's got to be, see, it's a status thing. There's no 100 million, a billion, whatever, 10 million. How much money can you spend? And they're fixated, that's the extreme one, fixated on a status or thinking, this is what's going to make me happy. But if I can get them to slow down, even with the models, it was, what is it you really want? Not what you should want, not what you think, but for the long haul, what's going to make you really happy? How's this guy going to treat you when you get sick? What's he going to do when you gain 5 pounds? You're going to at some point, or something's going to happen. Or when, if you have a child and you're sick at night, will he stay up at night? Those are things going to matter to you. Because most of them I find, because they're so used to the intensity of working and it's a measurable thing, that the main thing they fear is being bored. And the problem is any relationship, any friendship, at times is going to have moments of boredom just because of familiar. I just get to know you. That's what makes you a great friend. That's what makes you someone I can count on, is that you're not exciting and then scary and then exhilarating and then you're mean to me. Those extreme things, that's for high school. And as they do that, the struggle a lot of times is how much they're going to hold on to. Nope, I want what I want, like this one. She didn't want to hire me. She wants to marry a billionaire. Okay. I mean, that's not for me to tell her who to go after. It's just, what's she going to do when she gets used to him being a billionaire? She finds it. I mean, that's the rude awakening that wakes her. And the rigidness is probably the thing that gets them, and for men too, of how rigid someone is versus I want a real life partner versus this ideal I have in my head that I think is going to make me happy without me having to grow or become a better version of myself.
The successful women that come to you, with this challenge of finding a life partner, someone I can get married. Is it a typical scenario? Can you describe that person, or is there loads of different colors to that situation?
So, I mean, this is a compliment. Since we're talking about women, there's always variations, of course. But is there a general theme? The ones I see is they have usually tried a lot of stuff and they've been hurt. I mean, all of us have to some degree, but there's some trauma. There's divorced, or maybe mom and dad had an awful marriage or something. And as much as they want to let someone get close, they're also afraid, because the only person that can really hurt me is the person I let get close to me. So I can date the unavailable man and wish and wonder with him, but he really isn't going to get close. So I can just hope and wish and try to help him. And that's the loop you were describing earlier. It's like a loop. That's the loop they get into. And once, if they're willing to look at or use it, there's enough pain, or they're willing to say, this isn't working. Okay, now we can be curious. Now we can consider, because what you really want may feel scary. If I'm used to someone treating me awful, if I'm used to always being disappointed, once something starts to happen that you like, there's a natural tendency to distrust it. I mean, I've got a client now that just got married. It's what she's always wanted. And she's overwhelmed. And she said, what's wrong? I said, you just got married. There's nothing wrong. That this is what it's like with the new husband. That's kind of normal. But it's not normal for her. Her parents' marriage was awful. And so she's anticipating, when's it going to be awful? When's it going to be awful? I said, no, it doesn't have to be awful. I said, but you got to grow and you'll get used to this. So the ones that have that typically do well, but it's that fear of failing, fear of being stuck in an awful relationship, fear of being trapped. That's probably something all of them carry with them. And in work, I can overcome that by just working harder. I can just double down. Like we can work 80 hours if we want to. You can't do that with this. You can't.
If we compare a successful man and a successful woman, what's the difference in attracting a partner?
So a successful man they're going to be probably similar at work, because at work we're all masculine for the most part, at least that energy at work. A successful man is, and so this gets into men in general. Men tend to, we're not binary with everything, but when we're focused, we're really focused on something, be it the sports game, a project. I tell women, I say, men were made to fix problems. We like it. We thrive on it. We get our self-esteem from it. Therefore, men that don't want to solve problems, that's a problem. That's an issue. I said, don't try to help him. And men get rewarded for that. And we also protect. I don't mean just physically, but it can be financially, or we come to that. When a woman's successful and she carries that into a relationship, it's not a bad thing. The problem is it's too competitive. Like if I'm with a group of guys, most men know this, is that everyone can't be the alpha. That just works awful. So, and most of the time we defer because we don't care. Fine, you take the lead. Fine, you do this. But men naturally do this. In a relationship, that success thing, it's not a woman being submissive so much as I ask them, do you want to be cherished primarily, or do you want to be respected primarily? Not 60-40, 70-30. And most will say cherished. I mean, they want to be respected also, but do you want to be the problem solver, or do you like being taken care of? How is he going to be your hero? And so a successful man can take that from work and bring it into a relationship or a family. Women are much more malleable, is not the right word, but they can adjust. They can fluctuate much better than men can. And for them, I've talked to a lot of successful women, it's a mindset. It's just when I'm with him, I have to tone that down some. Not my intellect, not who I am. It's that otherwise it will feel too competitive. And so that's usually a choice that they end up making. because men are awful at trying to do that.
In a way, are you saying a possible solution, depending on the scenario, is that a woman needs to tone down the alpha and become, okay, in work, brilliant. In that part of your life, you're fully charged, you're successful, you're the CEO, you're making all the moves. But when it comes to a romance, yeah, you need to not be that person. For the male, it's okay. You continue being the alpha. And obviously you need to start caring and nurturing. But there's a hierarchy there. I'm the carer. I'm the hunter and the gatherer. You know, these.
Yeah, it really depends on what they. Well, I mean, most will say, because I'll say, "What kind of man do you want?" And there are some where the successful woman marries an artist. I'm just stereotyped, and that can work fine. And so he's more laid back. He's more easygoing. You know, he can. It's just like most friendships. I mean, I've got a good friend, and he's alpha, and we're good friends, but we don't talk every day, and we could never room together. That would drive me crazy because I'd have to defer to him. Yeah. That's just who he is. But see, men know this, like instinctively, and so therefore, some guys I hang around with all the time because we just feed off each other. We don't really care who's alpha; it's no big deal. If she wants to maintain that, that's just not going to be a good fit. It's not right or wrong. And I'll tell a man, I'll say, if you want a woman to take care of you and do equal stuff, I'm like, okay, don't go for this type of woman. That's not going to be a good fit. She's going to expect this because it's really complements that go well together. I mean, I can do this with business relationships. I can do a number of things. It doesn't do really good where we both have the same skill set or we're both great at this because we'll end up walking over each other. In relationships, that gets magnified.
Because as a man, you don't want to feel, okay, it's not that you don't want to feel, well, you probably don't want to feel, let's not pussyfoot around it. You don't want to feel subservient. You do want to feel your own value. You don't really want to be in a situation whereby you feel you're very secondary. And it's probably down to all of those roles. I'm married to a successful woman. Deirdre, she started Fusion. And for me, that was something that attracted me towards her. I like that. But I guess a lot of guys wouldn't like that. They wouldn't. They'd run a million miles, you know. It
depends on what she's like with them. Because there's women I know that are very successful, and when they go home, they like being taken care of, not pampered per se, but they're like, I do this all day long. I don't want to be in charge at home. It's not that they're just like, it's exhausting. That they want to unplug when they come home. And so it's always a preference. If they want to stay jacked up or focused, okay. Most I find don't, not because I tell them, just because I listen. And they're like, oh no, that's work stuff. When I come home, I'd much rather be mom, or I'd much rather be the wife. And they want a man they can respect. If they don't respect him, that's a different problem. But yes, I mean, I don't know about your case, but I find that works really well because women can make that switch. Men have a really hard time trying to do that.
I know there's a second cohort as well of women that you work with. And you were talking about people in relationships and you're talking about getting unstuck. How do you end up getting stuck? What happens?
Yeah, a lot of stuck it's a coping skill. And so growing up, like the therapist always wants to know about your history. But what we want to know with your history, and as I'm sure your brother would attest, is it's not what happened as much as how you learn to cope. Because how you learn to cope is what stays with us. What happened 20 years ago doesn't really bear a lot now, but the coping skill did. And if I learn to shut down if I get angry, a lot of men do that. If I learn to yell when I get angry, or whatever, if I get mad and assume you read my mind, whatever my coping skill is, these are unconscious. The stuck part is where I'm going to keep that thing that keeps me safe. But what keeps me safe also keeps me isolated. So I can just get mad and sulk. That'll protect me. That's awful in a relationship. That works terrible. And so the stuckness is how rigid someone is. That's just how I am. Well, men don't like that. Well, he just needs to man up. I've heard that one. I'm like, no, men don't like to man up, but don't say that to men. That's insulting. I want a man strong enough to overcome me. Men don't like that either. Men don't want to have to overcome a woman. We do that at work all day. We don't want to come home to that.
I know you have a podcast, Relationship Headquarters. I know you've written books. And I know you also run programs. You do one-to-one coaching and people can sign up for your programs. As part of all that, I know there's particular techniques that you have. Can you share some of those with me, or do you have to sign up for the program to discover what they are?
No. No, it's one of the things I've always liked, and this I think goes back to with the learning disability, that the benefit of it was seeing stuff differently. And so I've always liked to take complex things and try to make them simple. And one picture I've given women is, and they can do this now, is I'll tell them, I'll say, imagine you see a little girl, 4 or 5 years old, and maybe someone's been mean to her and she comes to you, you're sitting in your living room and she's sad. And I'd say, how would you treat her? I'd say, you'd probably say, what's wrong? You'd probably say, you can sit here. But you wouldn't tell her to get over it or quit whining and quit being a baby. I would say, now imagine your heart, and she's sitting to the left, and your heart says, when do I get my turn? Because I'm told to get over it, or this shouldn't bother me, or why are you complaining? I said, our goal is for you to treat your heart the way you would any little girl. Now, I can say that doesn't mean it happens right away. I said, because you already know how to do this. I said, but you got a different standard for your heart than you do other people. And I said, if you treat your friends the way you treat your heart, and they always laugh. I'm like, right, that's my point. I say, because when you do that, men get the wrong impression that you're tougher than you are, you're stronger than you are, that you don't need stuff. And then we get blindsided like, well, I didn't know you needed this. You never complained before. You never told me before. So that authenticity is really what I'm after. And if I can give them a picture of that, and one exercise I'll do is, I'll say, for today, no one has to know, pretend that little girl is going around with you all day. Your job's take care of her. So if someone fusses at you, what would you do? You wouldn't scream at them. You'd say, okay, sweetie, let's go. Or you'd say, I don't want to hear that. You do something, I don't know, but it's not an option just to sit there and take it like you might do for yourself. And so as they start those exercises, it's a mind shift toward, oh, I really matter. Yeah, you really matter.
Can you tell me about Women Men Adore Facebook group and that program? I love the name, by the way. I presume I wouldn't be allowed to join that group, but there you go.
No, the women would, sometimes a man wanders in accidentally and they're like, there's a man in here. It's like the restroom. There's a man in the restroom. They have that reaction.
Get out.
Get out. Get out now. So what I did that was, most every man I know, if I describe it, that when there's a woman they think a lot about, even going to high school, they'll say there's something about her. They don't always know what that is. It may differ somewhat, but you can just feel it. Some guys say she's cool, she's easygoing, she's amazing, but there's that quality. And what I wanted to explain to women is this is that quality. It's not necessarily one thing, but men can't describe it, but they know it when they feel it. They know when they're around her. I remember a girl in college, every guy I wanted to go out with. I mean, she was pretty, but she wasn't the prettiest. That wasn't it. She had that. And I found that any woman has that ability. Now, some may have to work harder than others. Some have gone through more stuff. I don't care. I care about the end result. I don't care if it's difficult, hard. Let's make it as easy as possible, but let's go for what we want. And those qualities are more about her becoming more of herself than about learning a bunch of techniques. One part in there, we talk about forgiveness and why forgiveness is critical for letting someone come close. Because without it, I'm going to be on my guard that doesn't happen again, or someone else doesn't do it again, or why are you looking at me that way, Greg? Start doing that stuff or projecting. And so we're looking at internal things, because I found when a woman really goes through this process, this wasn't an intention, but I'd have women come in and they'd lost weight. I'm like, what? And one of them was, I'm laughing, she showed me, she didn't take her pants off, but she pulled her pants and you could see that it was big. She goes, oh my gosh, Bob, I've lost like 15 pounds. And it's amazing how much holding on to emotional stuff affects our body as well. So that's the fascinating part for me, is all the different areas. But as they develop those and get a taste of those qualities, then they start to trust it of, oh, I really can be me. Yeah, you can. And guys will like it too. It just takes, usually initially, and that's what the Facebook group is for, is when they come in is yeah, it may feel a little odd at first, but try it and see if you like it. See the reactions you get from men. It may not make sense, but let's just try it before everything makes total sense.
Okay. It's funny. What's that book? Men are from
Mars and women are from Venus.
Women from Venus.
Mm-hmm.
We are so totally different. I remember going to the cinema with my wife and she dragged me along to Mamma Mia. And wow, the minute the film started, I thought, oh my God, we are so different. I need to leave this room. They were a different species. They were standing up, they were clapping to see Pierce Brosnan making an idiot of himself. Sorry, you're James Bond. What are you doing here?
Right.
It was a weird thing. Is there anything for the men in this? At any point, might you do the opposite book in living with your super successful wife and what you can do to make that easier for her and have a better relationship?
So might I do that? I never say never. I might. But if I'm talking with men, so I do get men sometimes because the wives or girlfriends like me, would you be willing to talk to Bob? Some say yes, some say no. And the thing I emphasize with them is, yes, she's successful. Yes, whatever her personality is. But I find that for women, the core thing is about feeling safe. Is it emotional, physical, financial? There may be one that's bigger than the other. And if you'll take the time to get to know her, and I just 1 or 2 days, but what is it that makes her feel safe or special? But that safety is a big thing because a lot of successful women I've talked with, it's not that they can't do it. They just get tired. I mean, it's different in general mindset. And they want to know that when they have a bad day, when they're weird or say weird things or just we all have odd days, is that he still loves me, because the insecurity for most women, successful or not, is does he really love me or does he still love me? For most men, we got married. Okay, unless something weird happens, I got the piece of paper. Good. We still want to love, but just in general, the big things don't change. But for women, it does fluctuate. I think a lot of that's biology, regardless of her being successful. I would emphasize that. And the other thing is, I think what men really want is a best friend. They don't say it that way, but it's one thing to have, she's pretty, but we don't talk at all. But I want someone I can bounce ideas off of. I want someone that kind of gets me and that can point out things. And that's hard to get even with. I've got good friends that are men. It's just not the same thing. And so I don't mean to utilize her, but take risk with her. Just let her get to know you as well. And that may mean sharing some things that are uncomfortable. It may not having to come across as Superman all the time. I don't mean cry like a baby necessarily, but just when something's sad, admit it's sad. That makes you more real, and she'll appreciate that.
Because I imagine the man in that situation, whether it's an existing relationship, there's probably a little bit of, okay, I'm not as successful as her. Maybe I'm always carrying this little worry that at some point she's going to meet someone who is the millionaire or the billionaire or the zillionaire that has more than I have, because at the end of the day, what does she see in me? For the male in that scenario with those women, you probably are a little bit on the back foot, thinking a little bit unsure of your own ground, unless you're very strong in yourself. And maybe when you start getting into that, and I'm thinking in a relationship, your eyes meet across a room and it's lovely and there's a first burst of romance. But as you start getting into it and you realize how successful and powerful this woman is, then you start changing a little bit yourself, because you realize, oh shit, we're in different places. And then you start changing yourself. You're suddenly not behaving normally anymore because you're wary and you're a little bit, maybe you're a bit jealous and you're always looking out and everything. So maybe the males in that situation are behaving quite unusually compared to, I won't say a normal relationship, but a different relationship. Complicated.
Yeah, but I think that's similar to what you're talking about with the models. I think it's the same dynamic.
Yeah.
And the men I've met, if I say do well, not necessarily players, but they treat all women the same. And that's a conscious choice. That's not something, because it's easier someone's pretty to react one way, or if I don't find them attractive to act a different one. But they treat all women the same. I knew a guy in high school like that. He treated all the girls the same, and every girl noticed it. Even the guys noticed it. And he was as gracious. And if I carry that mindset into it, because some of what money does is it magnifies insecurities. And that's something for me to take a look at is because her success, and anyone who's successful knows this, when you're successful, it's nice, but you get used to it. And just like someone strikingly beautiful, I'm used to that. That's not as big a status thing for me as you think it is. You might think it is, but I'm kind of used to whatever it is. So I like the fact that you get to know me. So that person that's like that, when the insecurities come up, I'd remind them, whether you're super successful or super handsome, whatever, they will get used to whatever you are. And the qualities that go beyond that are just basic stuff like kindness, the willingness to listen a little bit longer than you normally would. I mean, things that sound old-fashioned, but they separate you from all the other people she bumps into. And it's a reminder, I'm not alone when I'm with him. This is my safe place. This is someone that's got my back. That's a big deal for women. Does he have my back? And if he focuses on that, the success thing doesn't have to be that big an issue.
Yeah. And in a way, the fact that you have so many clients, in all truth, it is. And people are struggling to cope with it. And with your guidance, they'll find that success. I was just laughing there. And, you have the gossip and the kinds of things that people will say. And you'll regularly hear it. Oh my God, I have never have put those two together. Mm-hmm. How did he end up with her? Or how did she end up with him? People have this kind of a little hierarchy in relationships about looks, money, success. Maybe it's a little bit of human nature. No wonder we're all a bit troubled by it. So very, very, very specifically, how can people get in contact with you and what are the different programs? And I know there's a free book as well, isn't it, that they can download?
Yes, thanks, Greg. So if they go to Relationship Headquarters, for ladies, I've got a free gift. It's What Men Find Irresistible. And this is from the feedback a lot of women gave us. And it really is the qualities we talked about, there's something about her. It's something every woman can do just to start playing around with immediately. And then we have our intro things, the Woman Men Adore. That's the one that's been around probably for 20 years. And every now and then I'll do an update, but it still works really well. We get a lot of good feedback from that. And the goal behind this, the theme is how a woman can put her heart first. Because when a woman's heart-centered, you're not selfish, whatever. Men want this. We like this. Well, we find it very appealing. And we also have the bonding stages, and that's where I go through, this is how men fall in love. And a lot of women will like, what stage am I in? I'm like, well, it helps. If you know what stage, then don't do this and then do that. And that one, the women are usually surprised that most men go through a period of doubt. But that's a normal part of him falling in love. That doesn't mean he's going to leave. It's just he's starting to take you seriously. And then ultimately, our biggest one is called the Campfire Effect. And that's our 3-month transformative where we actually do the exercise with, this is your heart, this is your little girl, and you're going to journal back and forth with me online. And you're going to get in touch with that part. I mean, not because I say so, you just will. And that when women do that, and this is the fun one, is that the goal behind it is you end up glowing like a campfire. So we got the name. It's not something you try, but women will say stuff. The one of the ways they notice the difference is every class we have someone that says, there was this cat or this dog that hates people. And like 2 months in the program, they're like, I'm sitting there reading and this dog comes up or this cat comes in my lap. And I tell them, I say, animals know. I said, this thing we're talking about, people, I said, I promise you men can feel this if animals can't. So that's the one I really love the most because I always get to see a transformation. And it's not the technique so much. You're doing is men fall in love with them for who they are, not what they've learned to become.
I have to talk to you about happiness. You're on the Win Happy podcast. What's happiness to you?
Happiness to me is when I follow through, not just with something I said I would do, but I follow through with something that resonates with me. And for the longest time, I would make happiness about when things worked out. If I got what I wanted, I'd be happy, and I would. But I know as I've gotten older is leaving it to that leaves me at the mercy of circumstances and other people's moods in fairness to them or the weather or whatever it would be. But when I'm consistent with that, I feel like I've got a purpose in life. And I can certainly change that. But it's it's a happiness, but it's like a deep joy. And this can be in my relationships, like with my sons. It can be with the work that I do. It can be listening to a friend. And when I'm aligned with that and I stay true to that on good days and bad, that maintains a sense of happiness with me that it just makes me feel more of Bob.
And what does winning look like for Bob? Putting the ball in the back of the net. Have you some goals going on? Have you?
So winning for me is when I either set a goal and accomplish it. When my sons, the stuff we've talked about, and my sons at 16, every now and then will ask my advice. That is such a win. Not because I chased it. They're like, Dad, what do you think about it? I'm like, oh my gosh, this is happening. And winning for me is when a friend feels that they can ask me something that's painful, because I want to be that friend. I want to have that kind of relationship where someone can ask me, not just because of what I do for a living, but that even if I don't have the answer, they know I'll listen, because that's the type of person I want to be. And when I get that and see that, I feel like I've won, because being this type of person I want to be, to me, is the most important.
I love that. While you were talking about your 16-year-old son coming to you for advice or asking a question, I'm thinking of the opposite then of my own son, who now was in his 30s and he's very successful in his own right. And when you offer advice and you say, oh, Dad, no, come on, we'd never do that because... And in a way, relationship-wise, you start to think, that's kind of diminished now. The father's advice doesn't have the same value as it does, and he doesn't see you in that way anymore. And maybe that turns around depending on different subjects. And it feels weird. It feels weird when that happens.
It does feel weird. I remember my kids did this. I'm used to, at 7 years old, everything I said was gold. Not now. Now, not so much. And I think some of that's healthy developmental wise. I don't want them to stay at 7. Depend upon me, that would be awful. But I tell them, I say, guys, it's an adjustment. I'm used to you all sticking your finger in light sockets. Now to you're like, oh, I'm fine, Dad. Oh, okay, well, I remember.
Exactly. There's plenty more life sockets in life. Mm-hmm. My very last question for you. What was the best life choice you've made?
That's a good question. Probably the best life choice is we had a daughter and we decided to have another. We were just going to have one. And in the course of that, we found out we were going to have triplets. And I still remember that day. And that was not what we planned. And there were headaches that came with that and all the fears. But I am so glad we had all 3 of them. That wasn't what was planned, because I didn't realize how much I liked being a father until I had to be a father when it wasn't fun, when it was overwhelming, when they were just not listening to me, with all the other stuff. And I wouldn't, going back in time, I'd still have triplets now, even with all that I know.
Now, when we're talking about a niche, I think you could start another niche, and how to raise triplets. That must be a niche that comes with a unique set of problems and challenges.
Yeah, it's, having kids is its own challenge. The problem with 3 is you have to say things 3 times. So I have to listen to 3 stories every time I come home. I'd hear it, and they would fight, and it was loud, but it's like anything else. You get used to it after a while. People would say, how did you do it? And I would say, well, when you don't have a choice, it's a lot easier. So it wasn't like we can give one back. It wasn't, I said, these are my 3 sons. That's just the way it is. And so we just learn with that.
So is that 3 16-year-olds?
That is.
Wow. Yeah. Are they all quite different?
2 of them are more similar than one. One is quite different than the other 2. They're all very competitive. And as a man, you'll get this. With men, generally, like the older kids, the alpha, there's a pecking order. Well, with them, since they're all the same age, every day they fight for the same alpha thing. And it's calmed down somewhat growing up. No one was taking a backseat to anybody because we're the same age. And that took me a while to adjust, to realize what they were doing. So they are different, but they're all really competitive with that.
Wow, sounds amazing. Are they good pals?
They are most of the time. I mean, they'll bicker over certain things, but they spend a lot of time together. They have a lot of shared hobbies. As they've gotten older, some of the competitiveness dies down. But I've noticed if one of them was hurt, the others would be really worried about it and really concerned. They wouldn't normally share that. And they know each other really well, and at school they've got each other's back. So most days, yes.
Yeah. It sounds like a lovely home and a lovely life you have, Bob.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on the Win Happy podcast.
Thanks, Greg. It's been a wonderful time being here.
You're so welcome. We'll see you again sometime.
Okay. I'd look forward to it.
Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.